Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the last session of the day on the Open RAN Summit for Testing and Certification. My name is David Hutton. I'm the Chief Engineer of the Telecom Infra Project, and I'm going to be your moderator for today. We've got a really great session ahead, a couple of presentations, followed by a couple of different panel sessions from our industry experts. And what are we talking about today? So, Open RAN technology has been on a bit of a journey for a number of years, particularly within Telecom Infra projects since 2016. From starting on early stage proof of concept level testing through to lab trials, plugfests, 5G challenges that we see as well. But now we're moving to the next stage of really trying to drive commercialization of the technology. So in order to deploy Open RAN systems, operators are going to need to start to have and build confidence in commercial grade Open RAN systems that have been certified by a neutral industry organization. This has been noted by some of the discussions that particularly Telecom Infra Project have been happening, but also I'm speaking from the operator community, and I think you probably would have heard many operator voices on main stage and other panels throughout this week. That are talking to that point as well. The question is, how do we get there? So as you can see, we have a number of different industry experts here, and I'll introduce them when they come up on stage for their part. But just to note, if you look through the speakers and the panelists that we have here, we're not looking for the operator perspective today. I think that we've had that from main stage. We're looking from expert insights, from the people who are actually running the tests and certification, from people who are running labs, people who are having test equipment and developing those and running test suites, from system integrators, and also from the vendors themselves, who are the ones who are going to be asked to go through certification to help to drive the commercialization. So these are the people and the voices that we want to hear from today. But let's start from hearing from the sponsor of this session. And the sponsor for the session today is Cable Labs. So thank you very much, Ike and team, for sponsoring this. And I'd like to welcome to the stage Chetan, who's going to give an overview of insights from Cable Labs. So please.
Does this mic work? Hello? Okay, thank you. It's easier than hiding behind a podium. Good one. All right. Anybody here who does not know who Cable Labs are? Just quick raise of hands if Cable Labs is new for the first time. Okay. Not familiar. Good. Because I want to talk a little bit for the audience that isn't super familiar with us. If you notice there's three logos: Cable Labs, Kyrio, and SCTE. For the purposes of this discussion, we're one happy family, but we'll call out the difference between Cable Labs and Kyrio and then sort of get into 5G testing, which is the crux of what we wanted to share here. But a quick note, Cable Labs, this is a common question that I often get asked is, what's Cable Labs doing in wireless? And so I thought this would be a good start, right? This is an interesting thing that I found out is we actually, in the wireless domain, have some of the largest number of patents in R&D research, much more than number 2 or some of the other bigger brands that you see there. So that's just to put things in perspective of how much we invest in the wireless domain. Overall, Cable Labs is an R&D powerhouse, over 776 patents to date. And more importantly, when you look at our wireless strength, which we went here a little too fast there, you see that we're sort of following the technology curve. And you see that Cable Labs, a lot of our research is in the network domain and in the wireless domain, including fiber optics. So we're really following where the technology is leading us in the communications domain. And that's sort of a natural segue to what is the distinction between Cable Labs and Kyrio. Kyrio is really the productization arm of Cable Labs. We're the for-profit subsidiary of Cable Labs, which allows us to engage with a broader audience around the world. And we've been in this business of testing for a long time. We count some of the big brands in the operator industry as our customers. And we've really been testing across the domains, DOCSIS, Wi-Fi, and of course, 5G testing. And in a sense, we've developed really some of the good practices of how to get these tests done efficiently. And one of the things we find is there is a certain common denominator across all these testing. And so it's really around the best practices that we've evolved as we test. And we think some of bringing that knowledge into the 5G domain has been particularly helpful when we were selected by the NTIA, and now for 2 years in a row, to run our 5G tests, 5G challenge for the US NTIA government. And so, for anyone not familiar with what that is, it's really around accelerating the adoption of open Wi-Fi, of open RAN technology in the marketplace with open interfaces, multi-vendor solutions, and ensuring interoperability. And before we get into the headlines, or the little bit of the detail on this, we ran the 5G challenge in 2023. We ran 2 test platforms across a total period of 24 weeks. Each test round was completed in 5 weeks. And that's something that we've got asked a lot of questions. Maybe that's something we can discuss on the panel as well. And what you see here is essentially over 600 test cases executed over that period of time. So pretty in-depth testing, and pretty rapid testing in the context of how testing has been done on 5G so far. And really, we didn't, doing this in 2022 was a good learning curve for us. We were able to successfully demonstrate it, and really bringing vendors in from the cold. So these vendors didn't necessarily go interoperate between themselves until they came over and got in for the first time. And so really, looking at the lessons from 2022, we were able to do a better job in 2023 and really be able to test both the XN and the NG interface, so the RAN to RAN interface as well as the RAN to core interface, essentially testing the mobility aspects as well in 2023, which is, as far as we know, an industry first. And really, one of the things we noticed is the maturity of the vendors has improved. Our own ability to triage problems in the labs has improved. And really, that was one of the key components of getting all of this done in about 5 weeks. And that's, as compared to some of the data we've had from the past of plugfests running for months on end. And this is just the, the quick nod for anyone who's looking at which components were tested. That's basically essentially 2 pairs of RU, DU, and CU from different vendors. And we did use emulators to, stress test a lot of the mobile, and as well as to ensure the roaming tests that we did from base station to base station. So in a nutshell, what did we really learn? And I don't think any of this is breaking news here. I've heard this from other panelists as well, and we've seen this multiple times, people telling us that open standards does not equal interoperability. And I think we've seen that demonstrated firsthand as well. And that's because O-RAN has so many options, 3GPP has options, and everybody has a view of the options. So at the end of the day, everybody discovers that my train track doesn't exactly align with somebody else's train track, right? And that's, I think, a very critical piece that we as an industry need to address. And I'm hoping that maybe the panel discussion and some of the ideas from the audience will bring that out here. The other interesting thing that many of us, as we debriefed internally, was that we really need to rethink this concept of certification, which I think comes from a box testing world. And certification needs to be something more continuous. And so maybe one way of thinking about that is maybe we should be thinking about certification and regression testing happening all the time. Because if you think about Open RAN, and when you go beyond the open interface standards, it's really about agility. There are lots of aspects of vRAN sitting in Open RAN inherently. And so with agility comes software. With software comes the ability to quickly introduce changes. And so how do you know that a certificate granted in January is still valid in August when you've got 16 different software builds that have landed on it, right? So really these labs we think labs need to evolve. We think industry's view of what a lab does needs to evolve. And that's something that I think is very much in its infancy. So if you think Open RAN standards are at an infancy, we think labs are still catching up to a new way of thinking about it. And really what we learned from our testing is experience matters. We did I talked to a lot of the engineers who actually did the testing, and where do you spend your time? Where are your frustrations? And we see a lot of things around lack of CI/CD contributing to the frustration. Builds coming by email, back and forth email questions. When you really dig down and ask yourself what's really going on in a test lab, that's when you start noticing so many opportunities for improvement above and beyond the headlines that we talk about on stage. And so expertise matters. These labs themselves are becoming more and more like system integrators. I don't want to say that we're doing system integration job. By no means are we doing that. But we're having to learn these systems at a depth that we didn't have to do previously. And that depth matters because the more we understand that, we're able to help figure out which aspects of the testing need to be done that give operators confidence in deploying it. Because at the end of the day, even though the operators aren't here, it's really the operators that we're all trying to serve. And we're doing so while minimizing the tax on the ecosystem. And so I think testing can play definitely a great role there. And so just I want to leave with one last slide, a few thoughts, something that people can hopefully food for thought that I'd love to hear from the panel here as well, is this is a huge goal for us to achieve, this idea of plug and play, but we can't take our eyes off the ball. And to do that, we really need to start thinking about minimum viable profiles or golden profiles, however the industry calls it. There's been a paper that I saw from Vodafone and NTT Docomo that says, majority of the profiles could be rationalized. 80% of what operators need could be rationalized around a few profiles. I think those are all the building blocks that need to go in, and maybe with some of the activities that TIP is doing around Roma and other automations, we should be able to turn this around and maybe look back and say, wow, I can't believe it took 5 weeks to test something, right? We need to be in that world tomorrow. And so to do all this, neutral labs, which are not necessarily aligned with any operator, could perform an important role by maybe what I might call commodity testing or testing to the baseline. So that if we could get to a world where imagine 80% of the tests have already been done by neutral labs and the system integrators and operators focus on the 20% differentiation, that would be a great world where everybody's cost is shared on the commodity parts and the differentiation is preserved where you want to go differentiate your services to the operator. Now, I'll be the first to raise my hand and say we're not anywhere close to that, but I think that's the vision towards which we need to evolve. So with that, hopefully I've provided some thoughts for the panelists, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chetan. We're definitely going to touch on that 5 weeks. We need to get down into that. I myself have actually visited the Cable Labs facilities near Denver in Colorado in the USA, and it is a very impressive facility for what they've been doing with Open RAN recently, and I think the results that Chetan have just presented are for the latest 5G challenges, but you've been involved in previous ones and other Open RAN testing beforehand. So it's a very good facility. But yeah, we'll touch base. Chetan will also be on a panel later on this afternoon. But as always, it's always good to do a little bit of scene setting when we start to have these types of discussions. And it's always a good idea to get one of the leading industry analysts to come and present their particular insights. So to do that today, I'd like to welcome on stage Stefan Tural from Tural Research.
I don't have a presentation. I presented yesterday. So I thought you were doing a Q&A but anyway. Oh, okay, so you want to redo it?
You can just press the certifications.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So Okay, thank you, Dave. Yeah, it's kind of impro. You know, I've been brought in. You didn't see my face, right? You didn't see my face, you know, right? So sorry about that. Okay, so I presented this yesterday and said, because I think, you know, in this panel, this is on this bullet that we are focusing, and it's kind of a contrast, isn't it? Saying there is a lot of money spent on testing. I think we all agree on that. Certification and validation efforts, make no mistake, this is necessary to make everything work. However, we have been hearing that, I mean, since the beginning of the event, since yesterday, that many things are being done and with a lot of duplication. You know, there is a strong likelihood that, you know, in the neighborhood next door, if there is a lab, they are doing the same thing. And as Femi was saying yesterday on the panel, a radio is a radio, God damn it. I mean, you know, if you do something with that damn radio, chances are you are doing the exact same thing with another damn radio. So this is just, you know, the radio. What about CU/DU? How many configurations actually do you test? We saw NTT Docomo, they did a lot of work, you know, on their own, actually. And why did they do that? It's because when, you know, they figured it was a good idea to explore a new way of implementing a RAN in their network. Open RAN was the big candidate. Why? And I think I said that yesterday. It's an interesting use case, actually, that very few people have thought about in the rest of the world. Japan has, I mean, is hit regularly by disasters. They learned the lesson. One of them, 2011, remember Fukushima, right? Big tsunami. Thousands of base stations down. A government wanted that cellular connectivity restored as soon as possible. This was a big problem because, you know, you ask your provider, and this was 3G. At the time, they were deploying 4G, okay? No one was ready because, I mean, they were focusing on 4G. We're introducing 4G, you know, in Japan, and then all of a sudden, you receive a phone call and say, hey, look, I need to restore all these 3G base stations, maybe not all of them, but find me a way to actually restore the coverage, you know, in this region. And they were, you know, and they were like, oh my gosh, I mean, this is complicated. So it took a while, actually. And we have the numbers, actually. We have the history of all that stuff and how long it took and, you know, the impact on 4G deployments in the rest of the nation. So, you know, learning about that, and then you have, I mean, since you had other earthquakes that downed, you know, other base stations, same story, hey, Mr. Nokia, Mr. Ericsson, Mr. NEC, Mr. Fujitsu, these are the 4 service provider suppliers for 4G. And we have seen, actually, I mean, so what happened is, you're not ready, I'm ready, let's go. So then you lose, actually, business. But this is for the vendor, okay? But if you are the service provider, you also lose business. And on top of it, you have sanctions, you know, by the government because you didn't do the job. So that really, you know, changed the dynamics. But, you know, it took a while because I remember back in 2015, actually, we had discussions with the government in Japan, and they were already asking, is there another way to build a RAN architecture, you know, decomposing the RAN architecture such that we can go get parts and components from a large variety and diversity of vendors. And then we don't have to wait, you know, for the same guy or, you know, or switch, actually, which was even worse in this, because, I mean, each guy had its sector, region. I mean, you know, they were like, this is, I mean, we cannot continue like this. So then back in 2018, back to Japan, in Tokyo, government again under Abe-san, they heard about Open RAN. So, 2018, what is Open RAN? Sounds very interesting. How can we implement Open RAN? And, that's how the story started. To, be able to mix and match the best of breed of parts and supplier. And very quickly, Telecom, was on board and said, look, we have the resources, we're going to do it. And, and you saw Orex. And they did it very gradually, pragmatically, of asking their existing suppliers in 4G using ETSI interfaces to mix and match. I mean, I have Ericsson radios, let's connect those radios to a Fujitsu BBU. It was just about traditional RAN with open interfaces using the ETSI standard. In 5G, you have to look at the ORAN Alliance. By doing this, that gave them ideas of, if we want to move forward and look at, underneath the hood of, let's say a Fujitsu base station, let's, look at the components and see how we can work with Fujitsu. I mean, it's because Femi is here, of, bringing different parts from different players and so on. But then, go beyond that. And this is, the story of doing the testing, validation, certification, and put it in the network. So, so the bottom line is they did a lot of work already. So why are we doing the same work, in different parts of the world? And that's why, the idea is to have a centralized database of what has been done so far, and a lot has already been done, actually, in different parts of the world, starting in Japan, because then you can look at the Rakuten Symphony on the other side. And I'm saying Symphony because, this is coming from Rakuten Mobile, of how to deploy that stuff, as fast as possible. I can't remember the thousands of base stations they were actually turning up each week, but it was a huge number that we have never seen in industry. So, going back to, that testing certification, so, this was the, this is where we are, actually, with all the folks who actually managed to do this and make it work in real live networks. Interestingly enough, they are competing neck and neck. And I think, this is very smart because on the one hand, I say sharing would benefit the world. On the other hand, you did the work. Do you really want to share all the stuff for free? Yeah, you want to make money out of it. Okay. So then that's why in both cases, they are selling their knowledge. Does it help us? Ask the question, okay, I can reuse some of that. And actually, I have the work cut out for me, but I have to pay. How much do I have to pay? Versus if I do it myself, using a lab, okay, you go to OTIC. Because, when I look, again, in the case of NTT Docomo, actually, if you want to participate in this as a supplier of any component, you have to bring your equipment to their lab, and then they play with it. Okay, this is the way it works. So that means you give equipment for free. Okay, so, or you give your parts or your components for free. What is the benefit? That eventually you're part of that journey. And if you're part of that journey, how do you recoup your investment of bringing your products to NTT Docomo? Well, you get a cut of a potential sales. So that's going to be, you know, a very interesting business model moving forward, right? What can we learn from that? Maybe in the West, we can do something similar. You know, I don't know, I'm just throwing stuff out, you know, to brainstorm. But at the end of the day, make no mistake, certification is necessary before, I mean, in order to reach acceptance, such that a large service provider, brownfield, but hey, this was a brownfield, and still is a brownfield, can deploy the equipment. So what I'm saying here is that service providers will still have a lab to do the last touch, the last mile of certification moving to acceptance. What is done before has to come from somewhere else. So, I mean, you know, that's what I have to say. I mean, you know, I mean, throwing ideas, if you have ideas, they are welcome.
Thank you, Stefan. Provocative and thought-provoking as always. I think we can all agree that a level of global certification is required, and that's something that we're going to be talking in our next two panel discussions. And it's something that also TIP feels very, very strongly about in terms of how we can facilitate that moving forward. So let's see where we are in the agenda. Okay, so the first panel today is going to be talking about subsystem test and certification for Open RAN. So I want to welcome on stage the panelists for this, Timo Jokiaho from Red Hat, Femi from Fujitsu, Ranganatha Swamy from HCL, and Engwei Ku from Keysight Technologies. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so the perspective for this is that Open RAN is still facing a number of challenges moving forward in relation to a number of topics that people talk about. Product maturity, time taken to do the integration of Open RAN products, which is leading to a high level of cost for integration and testing. And as Stefan says, this is being duplicated as well, so it's having an even more compounded impact on vendor and operator ecosystem. And therefore driving towards a centralized level of testing and sharing of that information is key. Now, we do a lot of talk about the focus of Open RAN systems, but through different discussions that we've been having, we understand that there are still some pain points that operators and vendors are feeling as well, and that's what we want to talk about in this session. And those types of subsystems that we're going to be talking about are things like Open Front Haul, the cloud infrastructure, RIC platform and applications, and SMO and network management. So this is why we have this great group of industry experts to help us to get to the bottom of these particular issues. So I want to start off with a question maybe to Ranga. You know, you guys with an HCL, you have lots of lab environments, you do a lot of SI services, you've been involved in countless number of testing activities. From plugfests and challenges, but also private and commercial deployments and testing as well. What would you say the level of maturity of Open RAN products are, and what's been the impact of that on integration time? And through the years that you've been involved in this, do you see a level of improvement moving forward?
Yep, answer is yes. I know before we finalize that answer, let me complement that with few more details. In general, we know that there are two types of disaggregation distribution architecture. One we call vertical disaggregation, where the systems are disaggregated from hardware to software. So you have hardware, CAS, NF, and you have RIC, SMO. That's one integration track. The other integration, what we call a horizontal integration, where you integrate the systems for compliance and certification. So we have seen varying levels of maturity across these two tracks. So for example, for horizontal integration, the systems have been a bit more mature. compared to vertical integration. The reason why I say that is because for vertical integration, it still need to have that kind of compliance between CAS environment and L1 acceleration, and then the NF, and then SMO and RIC, and then SMO. For example, E2 interfaces have not been adopted by many. So you see a lot of challenges when you try to integrate third-party XApps on top of the other RIC platforms. So that vertical integration maturity is evolving, is slightly lagging behind the vertical integration, the horizontal integration. So that's our view. Through our plugfests participation, we have been participating in RIC test integration. So we have seen, as I said, high level of maturity in terms of integrating the RIC platform with underlying RIC tester. We are a great partner for Viavi in various RIC plugfests. We also have been following very closely the other RIC plugfests where we have seen various RU vendors integrating with existing CU, DU vendors, but that is still evolving in our view. That's what I see as an SI.
But would you say that plugfests are actually solving the challenge of getting...
Oh, absolutely. The reason why I say the horizontal integration has matured to the level it is now is because of the plugfests. And similarly, for the vertical integration where we are integrating RIC with underlying RIC testers or the apps above, that also has matured significantly. Just one more data point, we have set up our own lab. We are not competing with plugfest, but we have set up our own lab where we certify third-party vRAN functions for compliance with different RU vendors, the front haul compliance. So when we had set this lab up a couple of years ago, we had to go through multiple cycles for single band, dual band, and triple band radios. The test cycle duration was longer, and as we integrated more and more radios, today we have integrated 15 radios, including Fujitsu in our lab. So the time taken for integration and testing has shortened significantly, and that happened because of two reasons. One is the maturity level at the front haul interface, and that is being driven by plugfest activities. The other one is, of course, because of some automation implementation that I will definitely address subsequently. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Femi, as the vendor on the stage, I want to get your unique perspective here as well. And I know that Fujitsu have a lot of different product lines, but I want to speak mainly about RU integration. We hear from a number of operators and system integrators as well that this is still a bit of an issue, and it's taking a number of months, 6 to 9 months, to actually perform RU integration, and it seems to be a different process every time that RUs are integrated with a different combination of DU, CU vendors. So I guess considering that, we would say that the open front haul probably has one of the most mature specifications and test specifications that we have. Why is this taking so long, and what are the major challenges from your perspective?
Thank you. I think maturity in the RAN space is a loaded word, very loaded. And it's because you have new entrants that are coming into the RAN space for the first time. I said something yesterday, somebody challenged me. RAN is a difficult area. I'm repeating that. It's a very difficult area. And that's because you have user equipment that are connected to it continuously. And when something fails in the RAN, the first person to feel it is you and I. And we just drop the supplier at that point. So, but maturity is an issue for some, because if we just say RAN software is just another software, and I can just put it together and build it, then it shows up when you are going to integrate with somebody's radio who is very mature, who has been doing this for a very long time. When issue falls out, then it's very easy to start pointing fingers. It's not my stuff, it's your stuff. So a lot of those needs to be addressed. I would really like to see where individual rather than worrying about system integration, why don't we first worry about system reliability? If I develop an aspect of RAN, let's take it to the ringer. Is it stable? Is it reliable? And then when you come to an integration point of view, then the whole system will work. So, I mean, we've seen varying degrees. You talk about 6 to 9 months, but we've also done this in 1 week. If you talk to a beta san, yes, it was months. It became a month, and it became a couple of maybe about a week. So to me, it's maturity. The standard is mature, but then we're still seeing some new entrants where the maturity is not just there yet. Yeah. They will get there.
No, that's great, and I think it comes down to in Chetan's slides, even if a standard is mature, it doesn't necessarily mean it's fully interoperable when you take two different implementations of that. Do you think that, and again, I think Chetan, you mentioned maybe that an MVP to kind of profile that down, limit optionality to improve that level of interoperability could help. Is that something that you think is required for me?
What is that question again, please?
I kind of like developing a profile of the open front haul to reduce optionality and build out an MVP.
Sure, but the interface is actually mature. One of the first things you will do first when you're going to integrate with somebody else is compare the profile. Do you support this? So that front-end work of aligning the profile is very important. Because things will shake out. I don't support this, I support this. And then you come to the agreement that, okay, this is what we're going to test. If we define that as MVP, excellent. But I think from my vantage point, is that there are mature stacks and there are stacks that are still not mature. And when you come across the ones that are not, it just takes longer. Because in some cases, even the things that are flushed out in their interoperability profile in the back end, we don't support that yet. So maturity is still there. There are mature stacks that you will easily integrate with. So maybe defining MVPs is a way out.
Okay, thank you. Timo, obviously Red Hat are involved, in multiple areas, including the RIC. But I want to touch on cloud infra with you related to this. And I know that this has definitely been talked about as a pain point. There's been some interesting conversations that I've heard both on main stage and breakout sessions when some of the view is that Open RAN is really targeted towards the horizontal open interfaces and not necessarily the vertical stack. But then, we hear Rob Sony from AT&T stating, no, we definitely need to have a fully interoperable and interchangeable vertical stack as well. So I'm wondering which is it from your perspective as somebody who's highly involved in that, and how do we ensure that we can reach that point of interchangeability and interoperability on that stack?
Okay, but I'm going to start from a little bit different angle. I come back to that. So we as a cloud platform vendor, we have nothing to do with open front haul, which is understandable, other than we assume that it works because we are sending PTP packets, precision time protocol packets on S-plane of open front haul. So we just assume that it works, but we don't do anything on that. Now, we do have our own certification program, which I explained very briefly, and it's a very, very lightweight process what we have. So we hand over a script to a workload vendor, DU, CU, RIC, SMO, anything, to a workload vendor and ask the workload vendor to run the script on Red Hat Cloud Platform. And then they hand over the results. And then we look at it. Yep, looks good. Now, it's very, very lightweight. And it does not test anything on performance and nothing on capacity. It just tests that this workload can be onboarded on our platform, it runs, and it can be killed, no more nor less. So when we do real testing at home, I mean at Red Hat Labs, we unfortunately we only have access to emulators or test workloads. We do not have typically access to a DU workload from real DU workload or CU workload. RAN vendors do not give them to us. And I kind of understand, although it's annoying, but it is what it is. Now, the real testing happens, so we can host DU, CU, near real-time rig, and SMO in RAN context. And the real testing happens at the RAN vendor labs. We are happy to give our technology there, of course we are. So they can use our technology, they know how to use it, and they do testing, and sometimes they even tell us results, sometimes they don't. So the model is not perfect, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Now, one more thing on this, the lab thing, the centralized lab, which we have been discussing. I wonder how comfortable the RAN workload vendors would be to hand over their RAN workloads into centralized lab. You know, it happens, of course, in OREX, which is a big operator-led exercise. It's natural that everybody, here's my stuff, take it. But in the centralized lab, non-operator centralized lab, I wonder if they do that. I don't know, but just wondering. Now, let's talk about the APIs. So we talked about open front haul, then we have other interfaces between DU and CU. Now, I believe, and we believe at Red Hat, that we need to have also the more or less compliant APIs on cloud platform, so that it would be easier for number of partners to onboard their workloads on that environment. Can we call it the standard APIs? I don't think we can, because at least in our case, because we do everything in open source, and open source communities define and decide how the APIs look like, and that's not a de jure standard. It can be maybe called the de facto standard.
Are we referring to Silva?
Say it again?
Are you referring to Silva?
So, well, now I'm just referring to number of open source communities, but Silva is trying to do something like that right now. You know, taking all the necessary open source projects or component out there, integrate them into cloud platform, and define how that cloud platform looks like. And I believe they have a concept of minimal viable program project or something like that. It's kind of early phases still, but they try to do that. Now, I think that's needed. And in ideal world, everybody's software cloud platform should be compliant with each other, including Google, Amazon, Microsoft, this and that. It's a dream. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but that would be fantastic. You know, it would level the playing field very nicely, but it's a dream. Now, the last point I'd like to touch is, so let's put it this way, that CU is kind of easy from platform point of view. It's, well, it's not easy, but it's easier, a little bit sensitive on footprint of the platform. We need to think about what is the footprint. Hosting near real-time rig is relatively easy, and that's what we are doing right now in the current Oran Alliance plugfest with the Nokia Service Enablement Platform and Capgemini X apps. So that's relatively easy. SMO also is relatively easy, but DU is sometimes a nightmare, and we all know why it's difficult. It's difficult because we, as a platform vendor, we have to integrate the hardware accelerator into DU, and all the RAN vendors, they have different accelerators. Somebody likes Lucasite, somebody likes Inline, somebody likes Qualcomm, somebody likes Xilinx, and so forth. And we need to integrate all of those based on what our DU vendor, DU partner asks. And of course we do that. We're happy to do that. But kind of a funny thing is that we as cloud platform, our cloud platform does not need any accelerators, but we need to go deep into the cloud, the accelerators to integrate it. And also to manipulate the power management, energy efficiency features of the accelerators, as well as x86 CPUs, if it happens to be x86 CPUs. We need to do all these things specifically on DU, sometimes in UPF and CU as well, but DU is a challenge.
Okay, so I think there's a discussion on the layer 1 chipset interoperability, which kind of touches on base.
That's exactly the vertical integration challenge that I was referring to. It looks like you will have non-aligned movement. Like you will have look-aside party and you have inline party, and it is difficult to plan for integration and testing unless that blueprint is created and vendor says, I will go with this specific hardware platform, this specific NF, and this specific cache layer, and I will have operators operating that. So
okay. So further work needed being done on the vertical stack before we even get to the point of looking at that as a subsystem certification area.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ku, so you heard from Chetan's presentation. You're a test equipment manufacturer. And obviously heavily involved in the ORAN Alliance as well. That the specifications don't necessarily equal interoperability. But, you guys utilize these baseline test specifications to develop your test suites. So is it enough or what's needed on top of that? Where is the gap to achieve that level of commercial readiness?
Yeah, so maybe I can share a story that we had with Vodafone. It started last year. And Keysight, Vodafone, we partnered together. Obviously, we are supporting them in terms of the Open RAN, test integration, deployments, right, towards the goal they have announced in the public domain. And last year, we got together, and Vodafone and us, we basically had a discussion in terms of like, okay, what does it take basically for Open RAN vendors to be able to prove themselves worthy, right, for their solutions to be deployed in Vodafone UK, again, commercial environment, not just for lab testing, showcasing, and other things, right? So we decided to write our journey together with Vodafone into a Vodafone Keysight's Open RAN handbook that if you want is downloadable from the Vodafone website. Obviously, we got hard copies. You can visit our booth and we'll give you a copy. But the key thing that we looked at is in terms of like, we asked ourselves the same question. Is OTIC certification, tip badging good enough to be able to qualify the vendor into the Vodafone labs fit for commercial deployments? And does Vodafone as an operator needs to rerun all the test cases again, right, based on what has been done already in the certification test, in order for them to again go into commercial deployments? And we wrote down we basically wrote 60 pages handbook that clearly articulated the gaps where we basically see in terms of how testing is actually being done in the industry today versus what it needs to be able to get to from a deployment readiness perspective. So I'll just give a few, key highlights of the handbook, and obviously the details, you can go to the handbook and then gather the details. The first thing is in terms of like testing, in our view, is actually not being performed in a consistent, repeatable form today, right? So you pick any 2 test labs, you basically give them the same test specifications, same set of test cases, same device under test, and the results may not be the same, right? So the first thing that we need to be able to look at is in terms of, trying to look, through the entire life cycle of the testing, including the test cases, the way they're actually being written, are they prescriptive enough, all the way to having, calibration of testing procedures, test equipment, and test automation is critical, right? I mean, there are so many customers who basically came to us and basically say, in ORAN Alliance Working Group 4 conformance test packs, there's a bunch of conditional mandatory test cases, and the selection of those test cases are based on human interpretation, and you select them based on what you feel you want to test. And in this case, you can never get to repeatable and consistent testing. So how can operators be able to say, okay, you get a certificate, you get a badge, right? Let's go for it, we trust you. it's just impossible. So that's the reason why operators are really wanting to be able to look at how can repeatable, consistent testing be performed in an automated fashion. So first point first, right? Automated testing, including automated test case selection, similar to maybe what GCF is actually doing, right? You upload your device profile, you get a set of test cases back, you basically provide a report, right? That's point number one. Point number two, in terms of the ORAN Alliance test cases, and obviously all of us contribute to those test cases. They're good, but if you look at the certification and badging, they're mainly focusing on the functional perspective, right? Which operator will basically deploy solutions which are just tests on functional test cases, but there's no performance, there's no stability, there's no robustness, there's no resilient test cases, or even failure scenarios, right? So next thing that we're going to look at is in terms of how can you actually instill a framework whereby performance stress testing based on live to labs, testing methodology, right, replicating as much as possible, commercial network environments from RF to network impairments into the testing procedures, so you can perform realistic testing within your lab environment. That's another gap that we have looked at and is documented within the handbook. And then we look at, okay, well, if basically you pass your functional performance test cases in a repeatable, consistent format, is that good enough? And maybe it's not good enough. We look at things like energy efficiency, energy savings. ORAN Alliance today does not have any test specifications for energy efficiency, maybe some procedures on energy savings according from the conformance interoperability perspective. And then we look at the reflections of what we have actually done together in plugfests. How do you actually drive the standards to realize that certain things are really important? So last year, we basically got together Rakuten Mobile, NEC has a massive MIMO 32T, 32R radio, and together Rakuten Mobile, we basically innovated the industry-first ORU energy consumption testing methodology, which is fully automated, right? And we published this in the ORAN Alliance plugfest report, okay, so that's ORU. Then Vodafone basically says, okay, we need to be able to look at optimizing the ODU, OCU, energy efficiency, energy savings based on Intel processors running with local site accelerators provided by Intel, Gen 3 Ice Lake with ACC 100. How do we characterize the energy savings gain, pushing it to the limits without impacting customer experiences, right? So we did the first demonstration together, to Vodafone, Intel, Redisys, Wind River, and we basically showed that to the industry. Then the third part is like energy efficiency on the rig, how they emulate a network with subscribers moving. You can try to reproduce, right, issues and as well as, scenarios that will basically trigger cell on-off, carrier on-off scenarios without CUDU vendors bringing their RAN workloads into your lab by emulating the network in a cloudified environment that you can try to spin off tests on demand. And obviously, this whole thing falls together and said, wow, the energy efficiency, energy savings is an important criteria because it impacts the OPEX, right, of the operators. So it has to be included as well. Then the last part of it that we look at is in terms of security, right? There's not many discussions today about security, but in order for operators to be able to look at deploying security into their commercial networks, right, you have to make sure that you get tested for security. Obviously, we have Working Group 11, ORAN Alliance, working very, very hard on security test cases. But what we looked at with together with Vodafone again, it's not in terms of, try to send a few DDoS commands and see how it works, right? This is like we passed the test cases, this is it. We are talking about the ability to be able to generate huge amount of DDoS attack and look at how customer experience are basically impacted. When you back off the attacks, can the DU and CU and the RU and the G node B basically recover without any degradation in services? And last of all, just to wrap up, right, I know it's a long answer. The minimum viable profile is a really important subject, right? Again, you'll see that in the handbook as well, because we put all the conformance, interoperability, end-to-end testing together for subsystem, a pair of subsystems and end-to-end. By the end of the day, the operators deploy products. And today, we basically looked at a range of products, right, basically getting certified and badged. By the end of the day, you need to be able to put them together into blueprints, right? This is what TIP has defined as blueprints. And I'm not sure how many of you are going to be at the ORAN Alliance face-to-face meeting next week in Arizona. Myself, I'm a co-chair of this group in ORAN Alliance. It's called MVPC, Minimum Viable Community. We have allocated some time for us to be able to discuss how do we want to define the minimum viable profile. So those are my 2 cents.
Femi.
I just have a very interesting thought about RAN is deployed today. 5G RAN is deployed today. And we're not talking about who is testing it, from where, inside this, inside that. But I also understand the complexity of the vertical integration that the panelists talk about, because we are now diving into CAS layer, we're diving into cloud infrastructure. I like testing because we will be able to expose a number of things. ORAN-based systems are also being deployed today, and they are performing, whether it's in a blueprint, in a brownfield or blueprint environment. So my thought process is that I don't want us to leave this stage discouraging operators that ORAN-capable devices are not out there. They are. The testing that we need to do is to ensure that those things can last in the operator network for as long as possible, for as much as possible. He said something a few minutes ago. I was in a conference sometime last year. Oh, ORAN systems, they are not secure. They're not secure. They're not secure. Today, something has magically happened. They are secured. So I want to leave this stage to let us know there are very capable subsystems that are out there that work. We need to test. I don't disagree with that. But I don't want us to scare operators that unless you kill it from here, you shoot it from there, you knock it out from here, you are not going to have anything that works. There are systems out there that are working today, particularly something that is not non-ORAN. Nobody is saying, I have to go and do this to this, do this to this. So if we go full cycle, we may be creating problems that are not out there. So that's just my
I think that's a very good point. And the reason that you don't hear about it is because that type of testing and problems and challenges that are seen with product integration, etc., are handled in-house by the incumbent vendors who do the level of product testing. They do the level of system integration, but of course they're not telling the customer that there are issues here. In an open disaggregated world, it is a little bit more visible. Sure. But it sounds to me exactly right, and I don't want people to be scared about this because we're here to promote the technology, that there are working Open RAN solutions out there. What we're trying to do is accelerate the process for those others to become commercially ready in the shortest period of time. And I think Ku's comment on the fact that defining a common MVP so that we can aid in terms of that interoperability and putting together a strong certification framework that does a level of testing beyond what currently happens within ORAN Alliance, that looks at that negative type of testing, performance, scalability, resilience, capacity, security, energy efficiency, etc., is only going to help us to reach the goal that we're looking for as well. And in terms of showcasing the solutions that are working, that's exactly what the TIP Exchange is there for, to show the marketplace and what products and systems are ready to be deployed. So I think with that, I'd like to thank the panel for their wise discussions today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to our next panel, which is going to be covering end-to-end system test and certification. So please join me in welcoming back to the stage Chetan from Cable Labs, Mohammed Busher Sharaf from Capgemini Engineering and I14Y, Ian Wong from VRV Solutions, and Stephen Douglas from Spirent. Welcome, guys. So I think we touched on this already a little bit, but in order to fully deploy the full Open RAN systems, operators need to have the confidence that these systems are actually working. What they're used to doing, today is receiving products that are ready for them to just go and do operator acceptance testing. They don't want to receive the pieces of the jigsaw. They want it prepackaged, ready, certified, ready to go, just as they have been dealing for years. Now, in a disaggregated world, that kind of falls apart a little bit, and some operators are looking at taking on a little bit of that system integration themselves. But realistically, what they want to do is have confidence that solutions that are coming out through the testing and certification programs that both ORAN Alliance and TIP are running, that they have confidence that they're commercial grade and ready for operator acceptance and deployments. And the benefits of that is that it's going to have a reduced level of cost for all people in the chain, whether it be for vendor towards operator as well. We increase the knowledge of what those Open RAN systems are and sharing that level of information. And we increase the scale for vendors and deployment configurations and providing that level of pre-integrated solutions into the market. So it's easy, right? Chetan, before we get into this, I think that we talked about this 5-week period that, we have heard that integration, particularly on open front haul, can take up to months. I think Femi is saying it depends who you're integrating with. It seems to be getting better, but I was going to ask, in the 5G challenge, you said that the integration and the testing was done in 5 weeks.
Sure.
Were these already pre-integrated solutions, or was the integration done on hand? And if it's the latter, what's the secret? Because I think everybody wants to know.
Sure. I think essentially it's not so much of a secret as much as it's common sense, but common sense in hindsight, right? And I think the key thing that what we've learned is it helps to come there prepared. But these vendors were also cold vendors in the sense that they don't necessarily know with whom they're going to be interoperating. But a lot of prep work went in beforehand to ensure that these vendors, did a lot of the self-certification themselves. There was a lot of screening before they were even invited to come into the testing. So in a sense, the test labs raised the bar for on what criteria the challenge itself was conducted. And then the second criteria was that the vendors had to self-certify and make sure that they were actually going to interoperate with a given profile. And so I think that extra preparation time is what you don't see there, which then allows these vendors to come in and sort of proceed with the challenge. I don't know if the panelists want to add any other insight. I know you guys have had some ringside view to the testing as VIV.
Yeah, I think the cash prizes did not really. It's a great motivation at the end of the day, right? It's non-trivial, right? In terms of the thanks to the NTIA and the DoD and the U.S. government for doing that. But I think that played a big role, and we saw it. I mean, we're the test vendor that supported in year one, both year one and year two, and we did see a inflection point as well in terms of the maturity. Both the maturity of the products, but also the maturity of the testing itself, right? Like what questions to ask before they even come in. And we learned that through experience, right? And Cable Labs, you guys embarked on cold integration. I think that was really novel. I mean, think about it. Plugfests, you think people come in and they plug in and it works, right? Like, I mean, the reality in even O-RAN Alliance Plugfest, it's a lot of prep work, pre-integration happens before they come in. And I think this 5G challenge truly challenged the community to say, you don't know who you're going to interoperate with, right, until we tell you at that time. And I think that was, year one was tough. We got through it. Year two got all the way to mobility, got all the way to stress and performance. So I think kudos to Cable Labs, Kyrio for pulling that off. Yeah.
So in essence, Chetan, then what Cable Labs did in terms of the setup for this is that you put together a profile or / an MVP and ask people to comply to that, or at least give feedback as to what they support.
Yes.
So you're actually looking at defining that well beyond just performing the testing capabilities.
That's right. And I think the one is the preparation work that went in was also, it didn't come out from the cold. It came in from previous year's learning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very important point. That it's not only the vendors who are maturing, it's the test lab processes and the people are also maturing with it. Triage takes a lot shorter intervals than it took previously. So all of this sort of shows you that when we look at these, sometimes we look at these as cold architectural innovations, but there's also a human learning curve that's climbing along with that.
And how did you get to the commonality of what that kind of like profile or MVP looks like when you've got different parties and obviously they have different implementations? How did you get to that point of agreeing, or did you just say this is what you've got to adhere to and that's?
So perhaps that's a little bit out of scope for my background here, but I won't even pretend to answer that. But I know someone who actually involved firsthand there. David, I don't know if I can ask you to volunteer.
Yeah, sure, thanks. So the simple answer is we defined the profile. We played the role of operator, and we said anybody that comes in and does this challenge has to adhere to this profile in the front haul interface, this profile in the F1 interface, et cetera, et cetera. And we defined it all, 1,000 parameters, said tick this way, et cetera, and said this is what it's going to test. And then the first stage of that challenge, we actually did what we call a wraparound testing for a given DUT, tested both sides of the interface to make sure that it did comply to that profile. And that took a certain period of time. And then once magically the profiles matched, you put the two units together, and it was a snap to get them to work together compared to a 6-month process.
Okay, no, that's a good insight to cut down the actual amount of time testing. And I think we talked about the discussions between the different vendors as to that's your problem, you've got to fix it. That's my problem, I've got to fix it.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Thank you, David.
Mohammed, I guess welcome to the stage. So from Capgemini, but I guess representing I14Y Lab with the T-shirt, proud. So I14Y in Europe, in Berlin, have also been involved in many different plugfests. So tell us about your experience in terms of the end-to-end type of open RAN testing that you guys have been involved in.
Thank you for having me, Dave. So first of all, I would like to point out that yesterday we had the plugfest opening here at Fyuz at the booth for I14Y Lab, which is the second plugfest that we're having this year. Is for plugfest fall 2023, and it's actually the 5th plugfest that the I14Y Lab has been conducting. And back to the question regarding end-to-end maturity and how the I14Y Lab has been seeing the maturity of the different vendors coming in the I14Y Lab, etc. So more or less from plugfest to plugfest, you see that more vendors are willing to test areas that they've never tested before. Meaning they are willing more to test like things like performance going forward with end-to-end testing for as well as including RIC use cases, which reflects the confidence that the vendors are currently having, which means that more or less the vendors are really confident enough to show that, hey, our products are really working and we could go for any kind of testing. So more or less that's what we've been observing, and that's what I would like to point out for the I14Y Lab currently.
And do you think that plugfests are enough to achieve this kind of commercial grade and getting into networks? I mean, or do we need something that's also more continuous, as and when products and systems get into the network to make sure that there's a continuous cycle of lifecycle management as well?
Yeah, definitely, that's an important point. So first of all, the plugfest is a limited time activity, but with the I14Y Lab, what we're currently trying to bring in is the actual permanent test setups where you could come, and we're getting more and more requests actually for coming and having this permanent testing possibilities for not only horizontally but also vertically. So more or less. And then the role of automation as well goes in place, where you have the CI/CD pipelines, CT pipelines developed, especially for having this one-stop testing. Back to Stefan Terrell's as well on that point, where you could do tests one time and deploy many. So back to that concept again. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And Ian, I guess VRV Solutions, you yourself are very active in the ORAN Alliance, defining the test specifications, part of 5G, but VRV extremely active across the board on Open RAN and many different activities. So you must have seen a lot and seen the progression, I guess, as well as some of the challenges that have been arising as well. But how do you think that we can accelerate this? And do you think that some of the challenges that people are talking about are they down to? Are they standards in maturity, or are they product in maturity and we just need to up level those, or is it availability of some vendors and having access to test facilities, or is it the fact that we're duplicating test effort and almost fragmenting by doing so? What's your perspective?
So, I mean, as a test vendor, I would call myself a pragmatic optimist. Okay, so kind of like what Femi is saying, right? Like, first of all, we have to test. There are going to be challenges. If you think about it, in this industry, we've had 3 decades, now consolidated to 5 incumbent vendors. All the expertise accumulated over that, and a lot of the quirks, the kinks hidden behind closed doors, because and so now we're kind of exposing it a little bit. So what I see here is we're getting to a point wherein we kind of need to move to this pre-deployment mindset, right? I mean, we have some deployments. They're really good, shiny examples. But how do we scale that to more vendors, more facilities? And I think this emphasis on reliability, load and stress, performance is really key, right? And being able to extract, let's say, the minimum viable profile into these, let's call it maybe open, common test labs, so that you take away the 80%, right, of the common tests, and then but test the heck out of it, right? I mean, I think the problem with, plugfests and the 5G Challenge are good, but they're all events. You come in, you test it, you're good. There's just not enough time to truly load and stress a base station that needs to have 5 nines reliability in an operator network, right? And I think we need to get to that point wherein that's the bar. The bar is reliability, performance, stress testing of these, let's call it, components that make it. That way, in a way, you're now replicating what these incumbents are doing inside their labs and actually doing it outside. Because as of today, to be frank, I still don't see that, right? And I think, government funding is helping, the NTIA, Wireless Innovation Fund in the US. Other governments are trying to help this industry do that. And I think, I think it behooves us to kind of focus on, okay, what is that hurdle that needs to be crossed? And I think ultimately it's reliability and performance.
So, Stephen, as a test equipment manufacturer, are you also a pragmatic optimist? And what's your view on where we are in terms of reaching that level of commercial grade, and what needs to be done in addition to where we are now, and what needs to be done to reach that point?
I mean, there's what Ian said is absolutely correct. We need to move beyond just the functional testing side and get to the non-functional side. I mean, this is how we actually solved it with the 5G core. I mean, if you think about it, the 5G core is 2 years ahead of where Open RAN is. We've got multi-vendor 5G cores deployed on different cloud stack infrastructures that are now in commercially live networks. How did we solve that? We solved that by focusing on the the non-functional testing, real-world performance, and continuous testing. All of these environments now have continuous testing environments in place. And that's how it was solved. And I think that's where Open RAN needs to move to. And actually, you're starting to see signs of that. If you take Dish Networks, for example, in the US, what was the first thing they did? They built a common test environment with a automated CT environment in that allows their vendors to federate into it. They can test in a realistic, shared common environment. They can use automation to do all of the regression testing, and they've now got a future-proof environment. As software release cadences come, patches come, they can revalidate it all of the time. That's what we need to get to. And I think that's what you're starting to see with a large number of the service providers realizing that's the environments that they actually have to invest in. And I think we're going to see more of that. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to move away from having labs. I think what I would suggest is that we need to think about how we federate some of the labs so we don't replicate everything all of the time. Maybe you do have a few centralized labs. I'll give you a good example. You probably heard a couple of panels ago, Deutsche Telekom talking about it. They're probably going to only select to work with 1 or 2 labs that they've got a very close, trusted relationship with. And that will be the same with AT&T. That will be the same with Vodafone. That means there is going to be a number of these labs. We need to then look at how we create federation mechanisms. And again, that's been proven. We've started to see that. A good example, the UK government at the moment is trying to develop sort of a centralized lab concept and then federate to the other lab environments, not only that are in, say, universities, which are doing early research, but also to the vendor community so they can utilize them, they can share, they can actually provide their workloads in a safe environment into that, do the testing. So I think that's the steps we're starting to move to. And I would be positive about it because I said we have solved this with the 5G core. Absolutely, interoperability needs to be done. There are gaps. I mean, we see that all the time. It's mostly an interpretation. A vendor hasn't interpreted not just the O-RAN Alliance specifications, usually it's actually 3GPP interpretation. They haven't supported a capability because there's so many options, or they haven't got it configured right. but those are usually they're quite quick to get resolved. And I think what you just heard, at the start there, what Cable Labs saw, is that over the last coming, years, those resolutions have got faster and
Getting better and
faster.
better, yeah.
So to me, we actually are in a good positive step, but I would say it's continuous testing is something we really, really need to focus in on.
Yeah, it's certainly something that TIP is looking at, continuous testing for certification and a federated lab experience. One question I had, though, and it kind of harks back to a point that Ku raised, is that you may have, the same specification, you may have the same test specification, you may even have the same test equipment, but testing in different places, you may end up getting different results. Now, to me, a test automation framework for this is actually vital to perform. Do you think that needs to be a common test automation framework across that lab, or can that differentiate across that federated lab environment, or can that also differentiate? Or does it at least need to have some common requirements related to what it performs?
I mean, to be honest, you're talking, it's more about common APIs, because you probably are going to have multiple automation environments that will need to integrate with each other. And again, that's been resolved in many other industries. That's not a new concept. And I would challenge ourselves here a little bit. Let's stop trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. Let's lift and leverage what other industries have done very, very well for quite a number of years. So I think that can easily be solved. I think the template concept, the 80-20 rule is a good idea. I think that's a great starting point, because it certainly helps reduce the cost and the concern cycle that many service providers have, that actually, if you're 80% compliant, then it is that last 20%, which is pretty hard for them to do. They're still going to have their labs. I mean, at the end of the day, they're still going to have to do final carrier acceptance testing. They'll go through that. Yeah. They'll still want to do security testing. That's not going to change. But if we can handle for them that 80%, and we can give them a mechanism where they can actually leverage through federation potentially a common environment where a lot of those, say, release cycles, those cadences of patches, upgrades that are going to constantly come, then I think that's going to help them. And I think that's where we could unlock real value for them.
Chetan, please.
Yeah. Thank you. You guys actually touched on something that triggered another thought that I'd like to tie back to your message. We've been talking here obviously about the operators, and they are the big people who are going to move the ecosystem. But we shouldn't forget that one of the goals of Open RAN was to increase the suppliers. And a lot of these suppliers are supposed to be startups, not big, large companies. And when you think about, there's this story, right? If you're a startup and you get your first operator customer, you're very excited. You get your second operator customer, you're starting to be busy. And when you get your third operator customer, you're dead. Because operators are going to tax you with so many requirements. I mean, this is what happens to startups in the service provider industry. And so it's very critical for all these reasons that we have, whether you call it centralized labs or neutral labs, some place where you can test once and deploy many for the ecosystem as well. Because otherwise these startups will never survive and never grow if they're going to go and support the same tests run in different operator labs. And so in a sense, it's like two sides of the scale.
Yeah, making it accessible as well.
Making it accessible. So you're lowering the barrier to entry and making it easy. And then if you improve the confidence for the operators by getting to that vision of 80% common tests, now you've got a very viable ecosystem. Yeah,
so such a thing as lowering the barrier to entry, but raising the bar for the type of testing that you're doing.
That's a great way to put it.
That's absolutely, and I think at least for us at Viavi, I mean, our approach to lower the barrier is we really want to leverage the cloud. Right? Today, all our test tools are available in the cloud because, even as, going back to startups, right? Like, just the ability to kind of even during your development phase have access to these tools early on, right? Say you're not ready, you just want to do pay-as-you-go type of model, the SaaS type of model. I think we kind of need to evolve that to that mindset rather than these hard iron gear that you order online or kind of you have to call a salesperson and do all the quoting process. I mean, like, go online. Do it in the cloud, and kind of lowering that barrier, I think, is really important to open up this ecosystem. And once you get to a certain level of maturity and you're really to load and stress it, hopefully there's a couple of labs that you can rent some time in and truly, put 10,000 UEs and stress the heck out of it so you can really prove your worth. Yeah.
We will have the App Store of Open RAN.
That's not the first time I've heard that this week.
But I mean, Femi in the last conversation, I thought raised a good point. One of the testing areas that we should look, needs to be looked at more often is resilience testing.
Yeah.
And again, if you look at how other industries have solved sort of, multi-vendor integration, many times they come to the table and say, okay, if that vendor can be resilient to the environment it's in, then I can be pretty confident that it can deal with it. We're seeing that in the cloud infrastructure world at the moment, where if my CNF can be resilient to any behavior of any cloud environment beneath it, I can simply theoretically move between them. It's not there yet, but these are concepts we need to think about a little bit more often. So I think as an industry, resilience testing, I think is going to become more and more critical.
Great, thank you. Yes, I was just about to say, I think it's about time we ask the audience if they have any questions. So I think Stefan had his hand up first, and I'm going to have to grab one of these microphones.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Yeah, actually, Stephen, you brought a very important point that I totally forgot. Yes, 5G core. We are about 40 5G SA core in the world. Question is, how many of them are actually multi-vendor? Not that many. But you made the point that it's mainly during the pandemic that everybody sitting home was actually playing with 5G core functions. And yes, it's a fully disaggregated network domain. The EPC coming from 4G is totally disaggregated. So is data management, policy, and charging. But yet, I believe, and I have to look at our records because we are tracking 5G core on a quarterly basis. We track the contracts, we look at the stuff, we have an annual 5G core SA report plus SDM, policy and charging. And so far, the only guy in the world who has the most diverse 5G SA core is Telenor. The closest is Orange. Then, we got a problem. But hey, look, back at the beginning of this century, IMS in the first place was a very disaggregated voice architecture. And in IMS, we've never seen actually, look, you had HSS guys, PCF, PCRF guys, and then the rest, right? What happened to the PCRS guys? Look, there are not many left today.
Stefan, I'm going to have to ask you to get to the question.
Yeah, no, but my question is, compared to Open RAN, is this a good example to follow?
There's always a risk you disaggregate, so at some point in time an industry will reaggregate, and consolidate. That's the nature, I think, of business, and you will see that, companies will get bought over, acquired, and you might see, as much vendor diversity as we want. At some point in time, it may go back down again. I think the opportunity for us, though, is to try to how do we stimulate that? How do we actually get Open RAN deployed at scale, but at the same time not lose the opportunity of stimulating new suppliers to come into the mix? And I think this is the role where the test beds can actually play a major role, because you can have that duality of capability there. The capability in there to actually help test those more mature products to get them into large-scale commercial deployment, and still the capability to do that lower level testing where some of those new breed of vendors require and don't necessarily maybe have the funding or the investment to potentially pay for what can be sometimes quite expensive capabilities to go through. I think the market will play itself out. I would say though, in the 5G core, there are a few, but there's over about 15% of deployments now have selected multi-vendor, both horizontally and vertically. So we are solving it, and I think Open RAN, should look at that. And I think what's quite nice, I'm starting to see quite a number of major service providers realizing that, and the investment they're starting to put into continuous testing environments for the 5G core, they're now really seriously looking at that and saying, is that how I solve the Open RAN challenge?
Okay, thank you. Guy here with the microphone now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Andy Jones from Jones the Phone Consulting. I think we've heard from Stefan that the challenge is let's say the goal is to get to test once and deploy many. How how close can we get to the model from the incumbents where that really means test once for the entire market, the global market with hundreds of customers. So beyond the boundaries of any given, say, multinational telco with 20 or so countries in scope. How do we go, and what's the role for a global certification framework in achieving that? And maybe if I could add another benchmark, if the incumbents processes is one benchmark, another benchmark was mentioned, which is GCF for device testing, but that's, you pop the latest model of your phone in a jiffy bag and you send it off and it gets tested. How do you do that in situ in a continuous process like a dish times many federated?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, Andy. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get to a test once. I think testing is continuous. Things, we are moving into a softwareized world, and we should accept that. If the concern is that the cost of test is too high, the reality is that actually, I think, is a fallacy.
It's the duplication.
It's the duplication of it. I think, and Ian said this, a lot of testing has moved into the cloud. It can be consumed as SaaS models today. So I think that part is a bit of a fallacy. But I don't think we'll ever get to that single test once. The certification is, in my personal opinion, could be a double-edged sword. I see a positive to it because it will help build trust, but I can see a negative to it at some point in time. You would say, do we really need that? And I think at a point of maturity, you will say to yourself, we don't need it anymore. But until we get to that point of maturity, I think it's going to help build trust with a number of service providers so that they can confidently then move it into their labs to do that last 20% of testing. Hopefully, in the future, we'll not even have to talk about certification anymore in 10 years down the line, because Open RAN will just be accepted as the de facto.
Great.
Yeah, and I
think
we need to be more, I guess, clever about it, right? So it's really about reducing duplication. It's really about, there's a maybe misconception that the big NEM, we support all the big NEMs today, right? Of course, right? And like, if you look at 5G bands, there's 10,000 band combinations, right? We saw that metric somewhere in this conference, right? They don't, do you test all 10,000? For every region, for every deployment, you probably should be a bit more clever about it, right? And do you test the 10,000 always with the CU and DU fully loaded? Of course not, right? So it's really about reducing duplication. And the certification, I kind of tend to agree with you. Certification at the end of the day, it's just functional. That's the reality, right? It tells you I've complied to the specification and I've done really the minimum. Even today with GCF, the carriers themselves do a lot of their own mobile testing, right? That their own labs, and they have their own automation as well. So I think at the end of the day, we can't kind of get away from that, but we can. It's almost like finding the least common denominator, and do that, in centralized locations.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question.
Not a question. Just I want to 30 seconds. Just want to add to what Stephen and Ian said. It's not about test once. Maybe it's about build once. Build your test automation once using metadata or key-driven based, API-based automation solution once. Obviously repeat multiple times. We have been receiving a lot of requests from customers asking, okay, can you build a CI/CD CT solution that I can replicate in my lab and also in my customer's lab? So that request is known. I think from that perspective, just would like to compliment and say we probably have to build one test automation and then repeat it at multiple locations. From that perspective, maybe in the next ORAN meeting, if there can be a discussion on this, on how this can be driven, that would be
next
great.
week, Phoenix.
And in midst of all of this, it's also important that the business processes across companies also have to be aligned, because what we're doing is, where a single vendor had everything inside the house, we're breaking those components. So the way the information transfers and all of the privacy and other things, they also have to keep up with it.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Sorry, I think we're at time. It's already past our time. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much to our panelists. Please give them a round of applause. And I think that the summary here is that there does seem to be a need for a level of certification. Federated labs potentially defining MVPs to accelerate the process of interoperability before even entering into testing activities, and looking at subsystem and system certification to do this as well. What that looks like and what form that takes, I think, is for further discussion. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Teachers pay.